You've probably heard of Sir Issac Newton, Samuel Pepys and Sir Chrostopher Wren, but have you heard about their contemporary Robert Hooke? Over the course of his career at the Royal Society and Gresham College, Hooke carried out some of the earliest research with a microscope, which allowed him to observe, describe and name the cell. He is also described as the founder of the science of geology, discovered the law of elasticity and was a city surveyor, helping to organise the rebuilding of London after the Great Fire in 1666. To learn more about Robert Hooke, I've come to the London Metropolitan Archives, where Tom Fairbrother is going to show me a very special item relating to the scientist. So Tom, what is this book that you have here and how does it relate to Robert Hooke?
So this is Robert Hooke's diary. He started this diary when he was about 37 years old, which is in 1672. And it charts his comings and goings, some of his reflections, some of his arguments, some of his self-medication, some of his important meetings when he was in a very productive phase of his life. So we hear about meetings with Chrostopher Wren, we hear about meetings and even feuds with Newton, all manner of things like that. It's a diary, of course, but maybe slightly different from what we think of as a diary today. It's sometimes more formally called a memorandum book, so it's quite factual. Met this person, this date, did this, that date. We don't hear long paragraphs of exposition about his innermost thoughts or feelings or anything like that. And quite interestingly, it's quite hard to work with. The handwriting isn't great. He's writing for himself. There's abbreviations used, there's little codes and ciphers used as well. There's diagrams that are in the diary, which some we can work out what they mean, others are a lot harder to understand the context of.
That's amazing. So what kinds of things does Robert talk about in his diary?
So he covers all different aspects really. So one theme that comes out is his health. So we can see from the diary that he isn't a man that enjoys good health. That was known at the time to his contemporaries as well. And one, I think, particularly interesting aspect of that is we see him engaging in various forms of self-medication and even self-experimentation, which perhaps is slightly incongruous with this image of him as that generation of first scientists. So some of the attempted cures he's using, my understanding is, wouldn't have been the science of the day, and they're certainly not the science of today. So, for example, we can see about here, and so we have to contend with the slightly tricky handwriting and presentation, but on 31st of May, took child vomit. What we think he's doing there is using that as a purgative to try and clear his system. As I say, we don't think Hooke enjoyed, well, we know he didn't enjoy good health, and it's probably one of those vicious cycles where he's feeling poorly, feeling unwell, trying all manner of medicines to make himself feel better, feeling worse, and taking more and more experimental medicines to try and feel better. So that's something that comes about throughout the diary. The diary also covers Robert Hooke's scientific thoughts and also his scientific bickering and scientific feuds with other famous figures of the day. Hooke was part of the newly formed Royal Society and was a famous scientist in his own right, but his reputation has been somewhat eclipsed with the even more famous Sir Issac Newton. And this was a feature of the day that the various prominent scientists would get into all manner of battles and squabbles about who invented ideas first and where ideas come from. And this was something Hooke was particularly famous for doing, and particularly famous for his quarrel with Sir Issac Newton. And in his diary we see a hint of that. So I'm not a scientist, I'm not going to pretend to know the ins and outs of it, but some dispute about the nature of gravity as a pulse or a wave. The idea was that Hooke suggested something to Newton that Newton then wrote up into a fully formed theory, and Hooke never really forgave him for that. He thought that he pinched his idea. The truth is probably a little bit more complicated and subtle than that, but that was certainly Hooke's perception of things. And when we come to the diary, we can actually see, again, contending with the handwriting, we see a mention of Newton. We see him bringing Wren into the discussion as well. He's basically talking his idea through Wren. My understanding is saying, this is what Newton says, this is what I says, and there's a dispute about whether gravity is a pulse or a wave, and there's a little bit of a diagram which seems to suggest that. We see some diagonal lines here, and we see some wavy lines as well there. So you can see sort of playing these ideas out in his diary and recording it for himself. So as well as being a scientist engaged in various sort of theoretical and abstract matters, what's interesting about the life of Robert Hooke, and like many of his contemporaries as well, is they're also involved in very on-the-ground practical things, where applications of their science. So the diary starts in 1672. The Great Fire of London was obviously in 1666. And Robert Hooke is appointed city surveyor. So he's responsible for overseeing the rebuilding of the City of London following the Great Fire. He's responsible for the design of some buildings. He's responsible for the measuring of plots, of street plots and land plots and things like that. He had a reputation for being scrupulously fair in these matters. We also know that his grasp of science and his skill in building things fed into some of the monuments that came out of the rebuilding the Great Fire as well. So he worked closely with Sir Chrostopher Wren. It's sort of widely acknowledged that the design of the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral owes a lot to Robert Hooke. Similarly, he was responsible for the design of the monument to the Great Fire as well. So when he was designing the monument, he actually combined his love of architecture with scientific instrumentation. So the monument was conceived in Robert Hooke's mind not only as a monument to the Great Fire, but also as a zenith telescope for astrological observations. We can hear mention of and see evidence of the social circles that he moved in. Famous Chrostopher Wren, that's mentioned on this page of the diary here, that he met with Chrostopher Wren to discuss St. Paul's, and this was the time of the heyday of the coffee house culture. So throughout the diary we see mention of around 150 coffee houses that he would frequent. This was both social and business and networking and pleasure. They were very much part of the sort of social milieu of Restoration London.
So, why do you think Hooke slipped from public memory?
Hooke likely slipped from public memory because he wasn't as well known as Chrostopher Wren, he wasn't as famous as Isaac Newton, and he didn't take steps to preserve his legacy. Hooke's sort of been rediscovered in the last few decades as an important historical figure, and this source is one of the ways that's come out. This source also suggests a darker side of his character. So we talked about how Hooke used the diary to record aspects of his health, and that's recorded in symbols. So we see a Pisces symbol to record when he has sex or has an orgasm, and this implies that he has sex with his servants and, troublingly, with his niece as well, likely from the age of about 16. So that's something that we need to obviously be aware of when we're reconsidering Robert Hooke's legacy. And as we heard as well, he was a socially awkward man. He didn't take some of the steps that perhaps we might say a more sophisticated operator might have taken to preserve his legacy. He died without a will, he died intestate, and what often you would see people doing at this time is they'd leave a sum of money in their will to have a library named after them, for example. That would be one way that their legacy would be preserved. He didn't have any children in wedlock to preserve his legacy. A big contrast with the way that Chrostopher Wren's legacy, for example, was preserved. Also, we've touched upon him being a man of many abilities and talents and interests. He never likely mastered one of these to a level where he was the top figure in his field, if you like. So that influences it as well. And ironically, perhaps, considering we're sitting here looking at his diary, he never finished his autobiography, so he was never able to put his spin on things, his spin on his legacy. There's also suggestions, and this might be one of those stories that grows a bit in the telling, that his feud or this tension with Newton meant that Newton took steps to sort of actively quash Hooke's legacy. So Newton has a position of influence in the Royal Society immediately following Hooke's death. This is the time when a portrait of Hooke might have been put on the walls, that sort of thing. That didn't happen, and that's probably again something that's helped to sideline Hooke for posterity.
So if viewers want to learn more about Hooke, what do you recommend they come and see?
Well, the first place to start is probably the diary itself. So although this physical copy is kept very safely in one of our strong rooms. It is available online, so if you search for London Metropolitan Archives, or there'll be a link in the description, you can see this diary using an online viewer, so that's a good place to start. If you're interested in his work rebuilding the City of London, a website called London Picture Archive is a good place to go. There's plans of the city, pictures of St Paul's, the monument, and many other nice things as well.